In the last section, we spoke about using user IDs as our top-level hash keys that would allow us to better organize information stored inside of Redis. So let's now refactor our cache file and make sure that we are making use of this different schema. Now, as we do this implementation, I'm going to show you how to use any type of arbitrary value. So I'm going to assume that on your own personal projects, you might not want to use a user ID as that top-level key 100% of the time. So we are going to instead allow ourselves to more dynamically specify that top-level key on the fly. So we don't have to use a user ID at all. We could instead, say, use a blog post ID if we're trying to record, say, comments that have been cached against a particular blog post or whatever. So let's give this a shot. We're going to make sure that anytime we call this cache function right here, we have to specify some top-level hash key to use for this caching operation. So that's what's going to allow us to get some level of reusable code out of this, so that we won't be 100% pigeonholed into always using a user ID. So we are going to assume that anytime someone calls the cache function, they should also pass in an options object. I'm going to make sure I default the value of the options object to be an empty object, just in case someone does not pass in anything to it. And then we are going to assume that on this options object, whoever is making use of this caching thing is going to provide a key property. So this is the key that's going to be used as the top level hash key. So that's how we're going to make this reusable for your own projects. So I'm going to take this .hash key and assign the value from options.key. So if you pass in a key property, that's what we're going to use as the hash key. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Hash key, I just made that name up. We don't have to call it hash key. It can be like, hash key to use or whatever you want. So I'm just saying that if you pass in a key right here, I'm going to assign it to hash key so that I could then use it down inside of the exec function when we start setting and getting our data. The other thing to keep in mind is that any key that we use must always be a number or a string. Just to make sure that whenever someone passes in a key value right here, just to make sure that it is a number or a string, we are going to JSON.stringify the number. So if for some reason someone passes in an object for the key property right here, or an array or whatever, we're just going to stringify the whole thing so it can be used as a key. And then finally, I want to handle the case in which someone does not pass in a key at all. So if someone does not pass in a key, I want to make sure that we don't try to use undefined. So if you call cache without passing in a key, this statement right here would end up as undefined. And we probably don't want to use that as a key. So if someone does not pass in a key, and we can check for that by saying or right here, I'm going to use empty string as a key. Now you don't have to use empty string. You could do like default or something like that, whatever you want to use. But empty string is totally fine. Okay, so this gives us a cache key to use for our top level property right here, or top level key, I should say. So now we need to refactor our exec function to make use of our hset and hget functions rather than the set and get that they're currently using. So I'm going to find where we call get right here. So instead of calling get, I want to use hget, which is what we use for pulling information out of a nested hash. And then the top level key that we're going to use will be this .hash key. Okay, so hopefully now it makes a little bit more sense where we're getting this code reusability. So anytime that we try to cache a value, if you pass in a key property on the cache, on the options object that's going to the cache function, that's going to be what we use as the top level hash key. So it doesn't have to be a user ID. It can be any value you want it to be. Now, before we forget, let's also remember to go down to the client.set function. We're going to change this to be hset. As the first argument, we'll pass in the hash key to use. So this .hash key, like so. And then one last thing that we definitely don't want to forget to do. Remember at the top of the file, we use the promisify function right here to promisify the get function. So we're no longer using get. So let's make sure we update this to instead be hget, and then on the other side we'll do hget as well. Okay, so that looks good. So now we should be able to just refresh our application and use it as is. We don't have to pass in a top level hash key, because if we don't, we're just going to use an empty string as the top level key. So if I go and refresh the application, you're going to notice that all three of my blog posts appear on the screen because now we are using a completely different space inside of Redis to use as our cache location. So this definitely works as is, but if we do want to use some type of cache key and we want to make sure that all of a user's blog posts are all put into like one single bucket, then I could go back over to my blogroutes.js file, and over here I could find the cache function call and then add in some property to use as the cache key. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a new line here just to give myself space, and I'm going to say that I want all of this user's blog posts to be cached in a key of rec.user.id, like so. And when I save, by the way, it just jumps automatically. So I'm using a top level key of rec.user.id. Okay, so that's pretty much it to cache all of a user's posts on one individual hash object. Now let's try this as well really quick. So when I refresh the page, the first time I refresh, it should be pulling everything out of MongoDB, and then the second time I refresh, it should be pulling everything directly out of Redis instead. Now that's definitely a good place to start. So in theory, we now have this kind of nested data structure, but I still want to be able to make sure that I have the ability to like blow away all of a user's cache data just on the fly if I want to. So let's continue in the next section. We're going to make sure that anytime a user creates a new blog post, we automatically try to delete all the cached data that is associated with their ID. So quick break, and I'll see you in a minute.